Welcome to Kobe. This is the 25th year after the great Hanshin Awaji earthquake, and what is your impression of the city today? I think that it has revived to become a wonderful city. So it has revived, and the greatest reason behind that is the fact that the lifeline recovery right after the disaster was very rapid. And taking that into consideration, I would like to give my talk. So it is the 25th year after the great Hanshin Awaji earthquake, and I would like to look back to the recovery that we have experienced. The damage was enormous. The number of facilities or houses that were partially and completely destroyed was 250,000. So there were so many who required new houses. And how did we respond to this requirement? I think this is a very important point. I will speak in detail later, but for infrastructure, it took 2 years to recover. This was mainly the road, the highways, that required 2 years for recovery. As has been said by the Vice Governor, the electricity recovered in 1 week, and gas and water took about 2 or 3 months. But I think the recovery was quite speedy. My clear impression is, or memory is, that right after the disaster in the Lokko Island or Port Island, the residents there walked to Osaka City or to Okayama and evacuated. However, when the water came back, the people who had evacuated to other parts of the area came back to Kobe. So in order to continue with the community, I came to understand that water was very, very important and essential. And secondly, for housings, it took 5 years to recover to its original state. So 5 years were required. I do not know whether this is considered to be long or short. To the victims in Kobe, 5 years was quite long. However, after 25 years have passed, the 5 years that was required, 170,000 houses were built in these 5 years, and by doing so, the original community recovered, and also new community was created. So I think we were very efficient in being able to restore the houses in 5 years. And for the population to recover, 10 years. Local community recovery is what I mean by population recovery. And so Lifeline recovered quite rapidly right after the disaster, and also the housing recovery, the fast housing recovery of 5 years led to the wonderful revival of the city of 25 years, after 25 years. So I think what we need to be proud of is the fact that in spite of this large and devastating disaster, we were able to revive quite well. And I think we can highly evaluate ourselves that we were able to restore the housings in only 5 years. But today I would like to cover also the shortcomings that we experienced as well, our reflections of the recovery. The first point of reflection is disaster-related death. So in the earthquake itself, the life was saved. However, as they lived in temporary housings, there were many people who passed away in the temporary housings or evacuation centers. To the elderlies who survived, I often said that they commented to me that I would have wanted to pass away in the earthquake. Living in the evacuation center or the temporary housing is very difficult and hard. I wish I had died in the earthquake. That's what many of the elderly said to me. So that is what I would like to talk about in terms of disaster-related death. So one of the reflections is that there was death in spite of the fact that many of the lives were survived in the earthquake. And also, the second point is the economic recovery. The Kobe port, before the earthquake, was ranked number 5 in the world. So, Port of Kobe was a high-ranking port in the world. But now, it has gone down to 50. So, what was in the 5th has declined to almost 50, and so the economic recovery has not been complete, and therefore chemical, shoes, manufacturing, fashion industry, and confectionery, and also sake industries are the major industries in Kobe. And with regard to confectionery and sake, they have revived to some extent, but they have not been able to fully revive after the earthquake. So the economy has declined after the earthquake. And because of this decline of economy in the city of Kobe, the Kobe population has declined greater than the population decline of other cities, although Kobe used to be a major city. So the economic foundation has declined after the earthquake, and that is a fact that we must recognize. Maybe I am digressing a little bit here, but what I would like to mention at this point is the fact that the economic recovery was delayed, and in many ways this is related to the lifeline infrastructure. The Port of Kobe recovered quite speedily due to various support. However, in this global competition, the speed of the recovery of Port of Kobe was not sufficient and could not come back to the original ranking it used to hold. So with regard to ports and harbors and airports, for example, such infrastructure which is more international needs a speedier revival and recovery. And also electricity, water, gas used to be the conventional lifeline. However, not only that, but various materials have to come back, and also people have to come back. Workers who work in such infrastructure must come back. So it is not just the hardware infrastructure, but software-related infrastructure, shall I say, or human-related infrastructure should be recovered. So it's not just a road reconstruction that is sufficient. A true recovery have to include human-related or software-related infrastructure as well. So when we speak of resilient infrastructure, I think that is what I want to stress. Of course, gas, water, electricity, road is important, but that is not sufficient. Soft infrastructure or human infrastructure is also just as important in order to attain full recovery. So, going back to my original agenda, this is the fact that the way of thinking about recovery or recovery strategy changed drastically after the Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake. Creative recovery or build back better recovery. became the focus. So it's not just in terms of quantity, but quality recovery must be attained. And from the 20th century to the 21st century, the society must transform, and recovery, it must incorporate this transformation of the society. In other words, we need to approach the climate change or environmental issues, the global environmental issues, and also economic disparity in the world, and also aging society, smaller population or smaller birth rate and aging society. These are the issues that we must also tackle with in the creative recovery or Build Back Better. So conventionally, recovery used to be considered as recovery going back to the original state, but the concept of recovery has changed drastically, and this is common with the Sendai framework of Build Back Better. This is the first transformation of recovery strategy, and the second point is the recovery of people or recovery of livelihood, which turns out to be a very important aspect in recovery strategy. And we often say that we should leave no one behind. Everyone should feel it significant to live long. So it's not just housing. I said that housing recovered in 5 years, and wonderful, beautiful houses came back. However, nutritious fish and meat must be taken, and vegetables must be taken, but that is not being realized because they have to pay the mortgage for the new housings. So people live in these wonderful houses, but they have to pay their mortgage, and they don't have enough money to pay for their meal, and they are not enjoying a rich meal, is the fact that I learned. So recovery has to cover livelihood, which also includes sufficient diet. So we have to also focus on the livelihood and the people when we speak of recovery. And in the Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake, I think we were able to focus on that point after the earthquake. So a part of my solution to the thing that was given to me is that we have to focus on the people, and also when we speak of infrastructure, it's not only hardware infrastructure but soft infrastructure, shall I say, or human infrastructure that we must also focus when we speak of resilient infrastructure. So as I write here, I say hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure, both are needed. And also human infrastructure, that means training for DRR and also to be able to help each other at times of need. Of course, Japan supports various countries in terms of DRR and at time of the disaster. But when we think of the people of Japan, I think we can do better and more for international support and assistance. And therefore, that kind of mindset is also infrastructure. Such a human infrastructure is also just as important. So from that perspective, I would like to speak of the issues that we faced at the Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake. This is just a review. The electricity came back in 6 days. Gas came back in 84 days, so less than 3 months. And water supply came back in 1.5 months, 42 days. Phone in 14 days. Yes, landline phones came back in 14 days, and JR railway lines came back in 74 days, and Hanshin Express Kobe line recovered in 622 days. So the lifeline recovery delay, what kind of impact did it have? This is something that you all are all aware. Right after the disaster, no one could grasp the damage status. The helicopter was used in order to collect information about the damage and also to provide a relief activity. In the port island where the residents lived, there was a helicopter port, however, heliport, but the port island liquefied, and that is the reason why they could not use the heliport, and that is the reason why they could not use the service of helicopter. And therefore, there was a delay in the collection of information, and they could not respond immediately to the situation. Another point of reflection is that there is Osaka to the east of Kobe. All of the relief troops could reach Osaka, but from Osaka to Kobe, the traffic was so jammed. The roads were destroyed, and so the traffic was jammed. So what originally takes only 30 minutes required 7-8 hours for example, fire engines to arrive to the fire site, and therefore they could not rescue the fire situation. And also all of the water pipes were destroyed. Therefore, even if the fire stations or fire engines came to rescue the site, the water was not available. So when there was no road access and when there was no water supply, a great fire occurred which killed many people. So electricity, gas, and water all are related to fire incident, and therefore in terms of DRR, all of these lifelines are very, very essential. And also in the quick fix response stage, there is one example that I would like to share with you. I talked about disaster-related death in the evacuation center. There were about 900 people who lost their lives in such situation, and the greatest reason behind that is, well, right now influenza, flu is prevalent, but in the evacuation center, for example, flu became very prevalent and got infected, and many passed away because of that. And also the toilet was not clean, and therefore people refrained from going to the toilet, and therefore they refrained from taking water, and they became dehydrated, and that caused cardiovascular and also cerebral diseases. And so the fact that water was not available and the fact that a toiletry service was not available, that led to lots of death in the evacuation life. I don't want to talk bad about Japanese situation, but the evacuation and the food served in such evacuation center is very poor. Therefore, the evacuees start to lose their health. And so, as I say, hard infrastructure includes roads and gas and lifelines, but not only that. As I say here, or maybe later, parks, schools, hospitals, such a public facility also is a part of infrastructure. For example, in the United States, even though they do not use schools as a public facility, there are other public facilities that they can use as evacuation centers. But in case of Japanese society, we don't have much public facility that can be used as evacuation centers. So ultimately, we have to use schools as evacuation centers. So children lose their space for schooling, and many people live in schools as evacuation center. And so if they live in that kind of environment for many years, many days, they lose their health. So we have to provide better environment for evacuation centers. So evacuation space itself has to be included as infrastructure, a part of infrastructure. I think that is a very important reflection, another very important reflection. And also, the reconstruction of houses was also delayed. And what did it cause? Well, people cannot come back to the original community. Right after the disaster, there is no place to live. So people live. Well, there are many Kyushu people who come to Kobe to work, and which supported the chemical shoes industry. But these people had to go back their hometown to Kyushu. And even if they want to come back to Kobe, because of the loss of housings, they could not come back, and they eventually give up coming back to Kobe, and that led to the destroyment of the communities in Kobe. So the reconstruction speed of houses is also very important, and a very important infrastructure to rebuild livelihood or recover livelihood. And also here, and also recovery of industries. We need to emphasize and focus on recovery of industries. In case of Japan, we focus very much on the housing reconstruction, but for the community to revive, housing is not the only thing. Industry is also important, and education is important, welfare is important. So in total, these have to recover, and that altogether means a true recovery. So in case of Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake, we maybe tended to focus too much or only on housings. Maybe we were narrow with our focus. So we need to improve that kind of mindset. And this is something that I can say after 25 years. In those days, even the housings could not be restored sufficiently. So we spent so much time and effort on housings. But thinking of it now, maybe we should have also focused on economic recovery, industrial recovery as well.
So, as I have been saying, there were some points of improvement in terms of the soft side infrastructure, and I think there are major three issues. First, the system of immediate response or urgent response in the wake of disaster could be improved. As Vice Governor Kanazawa said, the counterpart system is now established. So the municipalities are mutually helping each other, and this is also important in the global scale. Beyond the national borders, we should be able to have a system to mutually help each other. So this kind of a system needs to be made and put in place. And volunteer work is available. At the time of Hanshin earthquake, there's no facilitated effort for volunteers. The first 1 or 2 months, about 1 million volunteers actually flooded into a Hanshin earthquake. So it was like 10,000 people per day, but there was no facilitation function at all. But in the past 25 years, we made a lot of efforts to improve the situation. So there is now well-established system to receive the volunteer work. However, there is still a big room for improvement. Last year, Typhoon 19 hit Japan. Affected area was asking for more volunteer work. So in the entire society, we have to make a system to mutually help each other. This is another important point when we try to develop infrastructure. So at the time of Hanshin earthquake, soft infrastructure was not sufficient. Well, I'm running out of time, but immediately after Hanshin earthquake, I actually transferred to work in the fire agency. So the assessment of the damage and the assessment of the needs, this is something that I made, the system to assess that, and the similar system is also available in Hyogo, the quick assessment of the damage and quick assessment of the needs from the affected area. That kind of operation system is also important as a soft side infrastructure. And also the legal system should be updated. I would not like to speak too much ill of Japan, but the disaster is becoming more intense, and current legal system is not good enough to support the affected people. So we have to update and upgrade the legal system so that it can cope with the disasters. That's another important soft side infrastructure. So holistic approach is important when we try to develop good infrastructures, and each individual people's hope should be recovered through this. Thank you very much for your attention.